Welcome back to Musée Park, where I'm here to drive the NB Mazda Roadster slash Miata slash MX-5, whatever you want to call it. So I'm very happy to finally cross off my bingo sheet in terms of driving every generation of the Mazda MX-5. To me, the NB is kind of the archetype Miata, because in high school, when I first started getting into cars, this was the Miata that was out, and this was the one I always wanted to drive, and as life happens, this was the last one for me to drive. So my question here is, does this live up to kind of the hype that's been in my brain in terms of what a Miata should be now that I've driven the other three, or is this going to be a massive disappointment? So this is very different in looks compared to the NA and the NC and the ND for that matter. And this car, I have like mixed feelings on it. Like, I think it's a very beautiful car. Again, this is the Miata that I grew up with, so to me this is what a Miata should look like. But it has a very like feminine look to it, so I kind of get why it had that stereotype of this being a girl's car. But like I said, I genuinely like the way this car looks, especially in silver. If I didn't buy my NC, I probably would have bought an NB like this one. Because, you know, once again, it's like, this is what I was originally looking for, but I couldn't find one for like a good price. And for some reason in my head, this is kind of like a toy car that shouldn't be expensive, so I couldn't really justify spending the same amount of money that I spent on my NC. And now that I'm driving it, I don't really know why. Something about it, I really like the looks of the car. It just doesn't look like an expensive car, so if I was gonna buy another one, again, even as clean as this one is, somehow you just don't want to spend that much money on this. So I really like the interior of the NB, but it's for a different reason than you're thinking. I used to own a 2003 Mazda Protege 5, and this being a car from the same era, this is such a familiar interior. It's just full of nostalgia for me. The gauge cluster, the shape of the steering wheel, this little center console area, it just brings back a lot of good memories of my Protege 5. The quality in terms of the interior isn't high. These plastics are actually relatively soft touch. There's no creaks and rattles in this car, which is quite surprising for this age of car. So everything is put together very well, and I personally like the way it looks. However, it doesn't look expensive. It does look like a Japanese car from the late 90s and early 2000s, which it is. So not a luxurious interior, but everything's put together very well. And in terms of just overall looks and ignoring luxury, it's quite nice and I like it. So the NB has the same issue as the NA in terms of the roof. The NC and the ND, you can literally just one hand close while you're sitting in your seat with the seatbelt on. You can't really do that in the NA and the NB. It's pretty much the same roof mechanism. So if I try and close while seated, leverage-wise, this is impossible. It doesn't matter about strength or anything. So realistically, you need to jump out of your seat, kind of grab here, and then you can get the roof closed. Can you do this at a stoplight? Yeah. But if you just have like a police officer who hasn't issued a ticket in a while and they see you unclip your seatbelt and do that, you might not want to risk it. However, you know, you can still open and close the roof really quickly. Just the NC and the ND, you'll do it much more easily and just much more effortlessly. So one place where you kind of win by buying an NC is the trunk. This is actually a fairly large trunk and the opening's bigger than the NC. So at first glance, this looks like, wow, I can fit a lot in here, but it's not deep. It's about that deep, which means putting this shoulder bag in is almost coming up to the top of the trunk. This backpack is basically the top of the trunk. So kind of this way and this way it's big, but depth, you can't really fit too much in here. So maybe a couple weekend bags, but they better be thin. All right, on the road in the NB MX-5. And I said this in my video with the NA. Something very familiar about driving this car. There are obviously differences in feel and all this other stuff between all the generations of Miata, but they're more similar than they are different. I just feel straight at home in this car. Everything feels very familiar. However, there are differences. First is the shift of this car. This is the same gearbox as the NA, but somehow it feels different. This feels a lot more snickety and more rifle bolt action like. The NA felt like it had a lighter shift and it was a bit smoother in feel. Both are very nice. I do not have a preference for either of them. This is so much more structurally rigid than the NA. It's actually quite noticeable. It's still not as rigid as the NC, which makes sense, but compared to the NA, this just feels more structurally sound and much more sporty. So one of the interesting things about this particular NB is this one comes with a 1.6 liter engine. Most NBs around the world come with a 1.8, but let me tell you, if you can, get the 1.6. I drove the 1.8 in the NA. It wasn't as nice. This one revs so much smoother, so much faster, and it feels fast. It might actually be slower, but it feels fast, and that's the point of driving a Miata, is for it to feel faster than it is, because that's fun. So coming up to some twists here in Musée Park. Again, this is a Miata. It's really good fun. And in terms of steering feel, of all the generations of Miata I've driven, this, I think, has the best steering feel. Is the steering feel bad in the other ones? No, the ND's easily the weakest, but this just has a lot more weight to it as you go through the turn. It just pulls it back to center a bit more, and it just feels more confidence-inspiring and a bit more fun. Compared to my NC, it is better. I genuinely like the steering in this better than the NC. Is it a night and day difference? No. But one of the reasons why I like the steering in this car better than my NC is because this is, again, bringing back memories of my Protege 5. I kind of feel like my Protege 5 had the same steering feel as this car, even if that sounds like a stretch. But genuinely driving this through some turns, a smile comes on my face, not just because this is a Miata and it's fun, it just reminds me of all the good times I had with that Protege 5. So let's come to the issue of weight. When people are comparing the different generations of Miata, the issue of weight always comes up. And everyone says, oh, the NA is the lightest, therefore it's the best and most pure. And as an NC owner, can I tell a difference between the weights of the cars? The answer is yes. But the strange thing is, when I drove the NA, I didn't feel like it was a lighter car. It could have just been because that was on lowered suspension and certain things were not stock. This car is stock for stock. This is a base NB off the basic black Tokiko shocks, so it's very comparable to my NC, and this car does feel lighter. I can tell through the corners that this is a lighter car, but the NC feels more composed, probably because it has a stiffer, more modern chassis. So the NC actually feels more capable through the corners. It feels like it grips better. It feels like it rolls less. And I feel like I can take corners faster and more confidently in the NC, despite it feeling a bit heavier. So Can you feel a weight difference between the generations? Yes. Does it really matter? No. Like, I'm not driving this and suddenly going, wow, my NC's a fat kid. So, do I like the NB? The answer is yes. This is kind of my favorite Miata right now. It does live up to the hype of what was created in my brain as a high school kid. But I say that with a caveat. This car, for whatever reason, I feel I would only buy as a toy. I wouldn't buy this as my daily driver. The NC is significantly better as a daily driver than this car. And if I wanted a classic Miata, something very special about the NA. Not just because it's the original, it feels more special than this car. This feels a bit more sporty, a bit more fun than the NA in my opinion. But it doesn't feel as special as the NA. And it's not as daily livable as an NC or an ND. So, strangely, I wouldn't buy one if I could do everything again. However, I kind of want this as a second car, as a toy, an extra toy. I think the NC is already a toy, but this is that little bit more toy-like and fun than the NC. And I would, you know, mod it out, do some fun things with the car, because this just feels more like a fun toy project car out of all of the generations of Miata. Is that a bad thing? No. But yeah, again, for some reason, my vision of this car is not one to just keep for the ages. It's just one to just have fun with and use as a toy.